what happens when America's busiest airport suddenly becomes the stage for a counterintelligence drama that looks more like a thriller than routine enforcement. On the morning of August 14th, 2025, travelers at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, a hub moving more than 100 million passengers a year, found themselves trapped in a scene of organized chaos. ICE tactical teams swept into one of the international lounges, sealing off exits and locking down the area. Within hours, nearly 1,700 fraudulent passports were seized, a haul so staggering it forced both the public and security agencies to confront uncomfortable questions about how deeply forgery networks had penetrated the very arteries of global travel. Witnesses described rolling suitcases left abandoned passengers pressed against walls and departure boards flashing silently while agents in tactical jackets unfurled cordons. According to DHS officials, this was not a random sweep, it was the culmination of months of intelligence work targeting sophisticated forgery cells believed to operate out of China, Mexico, and several African states. Each document carried cutting-edge features, three-dimensional seals, counterfeit biometric chips, and holograms sharp enough to fool most border checkpoints. Analysts estimate such passports can fetch between $5,000 and $10,000 apiece on the black market, signaling an industry not of amateurs but of syndicates operating on an industrial scale. The shockwaves rippled instantly through air traffic. More than 200 flights were delayed, stranding over 5,000 travelers and inflicting losses that industry experts pegged at nearly $1 million in a single afternoon. For an economy reliant on seamless mobility, the raid was a reminder of how fragile security lines really are. Officials later revealed that had those documents slipped into circulation, over 1,000 attempted illegal entries might have been facilitated in the coming months, entries that federal analysts believe could have heightened risks of trafficking, organized crime, and even terror-linked infiltration. The broader context reveals why the Trump administration pushed enforcement harder than ever. By mid-August 2025, ICE had conducted more than 500 raids nationwide, a 20% jump compared with July. Homeland Security reported a 30% rise in counterfeit travel documents seized compared to 2024, an escalation that underscores a tightening race between state authorities and increasingly sophisticated forgers. Military and security experts have begun connecting dots between forged passport networks and global conflict zones. A recent Reuters report highlighted how trafficking groups in Eastern Europe have supplied false identities to fighters moving between Russia and occupied Ukraine, exploiting gaps in border systems already strained by drone warfare and artillery escalations. BBC analysts warn that similar networks could be leveraged by Iran-backed groups smuggling operatives through commercial hubs, particularly as the Israel-Iran confrontation intensifies. The parallels to Atlanta are chilling. The same document technologies uncovered there could just as easily be redirected toward bypassing European or Middle Eastern airports in wartime. In Washington, President Trump praised the Atlanta operation as a decisive strike against criminals who think America's borders are open doors, but security veterans caution that the seizure is a symptom, not a cure. Former NATO intelligence officer Colonel David Freeman told The Guardian that every passport seized today represents a larger network still at large. Unless source countries clamp down, the West will keep playing defense at its airports. The Atlanta raid also exposed the strategic dilemma facing NATO and the US in 2025: how to secure mobility without paralyzing it. Airports are vital not only to tourism and trade, but also to military readiness, serving as hubs for rapid troop deployments. If forged documents can flow so easily, then adversaries from Russian covert operatives to cartel-linked smugglers may find new pathways to infiltrate Western soil. The images of biometric scanners being wheeled into a civilian lounge underscored this new reality. As one passenger told DW News, it felt like a war front had opened right in the terminal. The question for Americans and their allies is clear. Can high security enforcement at this scale truly protect the skies, or will it erode public trust and strain an already fragile travel system? How can a simple booklet of paper and chip technology become a weapon in the hands of global syndicates? The answer lies in what ICE uncovered in Atlanta industrial-scale deception. The nearly 1,700 fraudulent passports seized were not the crude photocopies of decades past. These were precision-engineered documents carrying embedded electronic chips, 3D security seals, and holographic features sophisticated enough to fool automated checkpoints across Europe, Asia, and North America. In some cases, analysts found forged biometric data that mirrored genuine US or EU templates. This discovery shocked even seasoned border control veterans who admitted privately to Reuters that the forgers are closing the gap with official production facilities. The financial scale of such operations is staggering. On the black market, one high-grade fake passport can command prices ranging from $5,000 to $10,000 US. When multiplied by the volume seized in Atlanta, the operation disrupted a potential trade worth upwards of $17 million. These profits are rarely confined to petty criminals. Intelligence reports link them to transnational crime syndicates, drug cartels, and even proxy networks backed by hostile states. In 2023, European investigators revealed ties between forged Syrian passports and ISIS sleeper cells. In 2024, a Jane's Defense Weekly report documented how Russian-backed militias in Donbass used forged Latin American passports to smuggle drone parts and night vision equipment through civilian channels. The Atlanta haul therefore should be seen not just as a domestic enforcement victory, but as a piece of a much larger geopolitical puzzle. Forgery networks thrive in zones where warfare and migration intersect. With the war in Ukraine intensifying through 2025, Russia has increased its reliance on asymmetric tactics, including smuggling operatives under false identities across Schengen borders. Similarly, escalating Israel-Iran clashes have driven regional groups to seek covert mobility fake passports being their first weapon of choice. Defense news analysts warn that if such networks secure routes through American or European airports, Western counterterrorism frameworks could face breaches at a scale unseen since 9/11. The direct consequences for Atlanta were immediate and painful. Over 200 flights delayed, more than 5,000 passengers stranded, and airlines forced to pay nearly $1 million in compensation in just one afternoon. Yet beyond these figures lies the more troubling truth: forgers had already tested vulnerabilities in the US aviation system. If nearly 1,700 documents surfaced in a single lounge, how many others had already circulated undetected? Experts from the Royal United Services Institute RUSI in London suggest that for every passport seized, as many as 3 may already have slipped through international checkpoints. That ratio would imply tens of thousands of forged identities circulating globally at any given time. Such numbers blur the line between immigration enforcement and national defense. One veteran European border official told BBC News, "At this point, passports are not just travel documents. They are keys to entire economies, military systems, and political leverage." President Trump's administration has doubled down on linking such operations to broader homeland security doctrine. In a statement after the Atlanta raid, the White House stressed that America's enemies, whether cartels, traffickers, or hostile powers, will not exploit our airports. Yet even within government ranks, debate lingers. While enforcement strikes disrupt supply, they also raise questions about sustainability. How long can mass raids and lockdowns continue before they erode public trust and trigger economic backlash? The Atlanta case thus raises a critical dilemma. When forged passports are crafted with such skill and deployed at such scale, are traditional border checks enough, or must the West shift toward an intelligence-driven military-grade defense posture across its airports? What happens when one airport lockdown becomes a model for an entire country's security policy? The Atlanta raid did not remain an isolated incident. Within weeks, reports confirmed that ICE had conducted over 500 similar raids nationwide by August 2025, representing a 20% surge compared to the month prior. This escalation illustrates the shift under the Trump administration toward proactive disruption, striking at networks before they could embed further into US infrastructure. The numbers are stark. According to the Department of Homeland Security, more than 10,000 counterfeit travel documents have been seized in 2025 so far, a 30% increase from 2024. These figures are not merely statistics. They reveal an accelerating contest between enforcement agencies and syndicates whose tools grow sharper by the month. For the United States, Atlanta became a symbol, not just a local disruption, but a signal that American airports are now prime battlegrounds in a global war of identity fraud. The ripple effects stretched across the aviation industry. Airlines scrambled to review security procedures, fearing reputational and financial fallout. Industry groups warned that repeated lockdowns could erode trust in U.S. hubs as global transit points. Business leaders expressed concern that multi-million-dollar disruptions could recur without warning, undermining the economy's reliance on fast, predictable connectivity. Reuters aviation analysts estimated that just a handful of large-scale raids per quarter could cost carriers and airports hundreds of millions annually. Beyond economics, the surge in enforcement exposed the interconnectedness of crime and conflict. Forged documents officials noted are often stepping stones for other forms of infiltration, drug trafficking, illegal arms transfers, and even covert state-backed missions. A BBC investigation in September 2025 revealed that certain African-based forgery cells had direct ties to smuggling routes feeding into Libyan militias, who in turn channeled fighters toward proxy wars in the Middle East. In Washington, security analysts linked this chain to the broader contest with Iran, warning that forged identities could enable Tehran's operatives to bypass sanctions and move funds covertly through Western financial systems. The same month, DW News highlighted a disturbing parallel in Eastern Europe. Forged passports allowed Russian operatives to infiltrate supply chains, moving drone components into Belarus. These drones later appeared in combat along the Ukrainian front. Such revelations made the Atlanta seizure feel less like a domestic police action and more like an early warning siren of hybrid warfare where state rivals exploit the cracks of civilian infrastructure. Military strategists argue that the scale of ICE operations mirrors tactics normally reserved for counterterrorism. Deploying 50 tactical officers with biometric scanners in an airport lounge was unprecedented in peacetime, but it reflected the gravity of the threat. As one retired NATO security chief told The Guardian, when the tools of war-funding movement logistics are hidden inside civilian traffic, then every terminal becomes a front line. The political dimension is equally pronounced. President Trump has repeatedly emphasized border security as a cornerstone of national defense, and the Atlanta raid gave his administration a tangible victory to present to voters. Supporters hail it as proof that aggressive enforcement deters infiltration. Critics, however, argue that mass raids risk normalizing extraordinary measures that erode public freedoms. What remains unresolved is whether the surge in ICE operations represents a short-term tactic or the new normal. Can airports function under the constant shadow of sudden lockdowns, or will this strain both commerce and civil liberties beyond endurance? Was Atlanta a triumph of national security or a troubling glimpse of overreach? Just 2 days after the raid on August 16, 2025, television panels, podcasts, and social media platforms lit up with debate. On one side, government officials pointed to a sobering record. FBI statistics confirmed that in the last decade, 15% of attempted terrorist plots in the EU involved forged documents. Homeland Security warned that fake passports are not simply about slipping past customs, they are gateways to human trafficking, organized crime, and state-backed infiltration. For these advocates, the Atlanta raid was more than justified. It was essential. But dissent was just as loud. Civil liberties organizations such as Human Rights Watch and the ACLU raised alarms about the methods used. Reports of over 200 complaints filed against ICE in August alone, a 10% increase from July, suggested troubling patterns of wrongful detention, racial profiling, and disruption of lawful travel. Testimonies included citizens mistakenly detained, families separated in front of children, and travelers interrogated for hours without clear justification. To critics, Atlanta was not a symbol of security, but of fragile freedoms being tested under force. Social media reflected this divide vividly. On X, retired law enforcement officers and pro-security voices praised ICE, with one former police chief writing, "This is exactly what voters demanded: security in action." Others called for swift deportations of anyone caught with fraudulent papers. Yet dissenters gained traction too. Journalists accused ICE of detaining individuals with existing court relief. Activists warned that raids normalized the abuse of authority. Some posts claimed ICE agents damaged property and suppressed recording devices, sparking a wave of 20,000 online interactions in less than 48 hours. The clash of narratives highlights a deeper tension. To one side, ICE represents the shield defending the nation against infiltration. To the other, it becomes the sword cutting indiscriminately into civil rights. And as images of biometric scanners and tactical gear circulated globally, America's allies and adversaries both took note. European observers worried that such operations might soon reach their own airports, where migration flows from Ukraine's war and Middle Eastern conflicts are already straining systems. Chinese state media, meanwhile, portrayed the raid as proof of American hypocrisy, championing freedom while practicing mass surveillance. Military analysts emphasize that this debate has consequences beyond law enforcement. The NATO alliance depends on coordinated security protocols across civilian infrastructure. If the US normalizes mass lockdowns, European partners may face pressure to adopt similar tactics, potentially disrupting transatlantic travel and commerce. Yet failure to act decisively could leave open channels for adversaries, whether Russian operatives bypassing sanctions or Iranian proxies infiltrating Europe's heartland. Economists warn of another layer public trust. Airports function on predictability, efficiency, and consumer confidence. If passengers begin to fear sudden interrogations, or if global business leaders start diverting through less intrusive hubs, America risks losing its dominance as an aviation superpower. The Guardian quoted a Western aviation strategist who remarked, "Atlanta is more than a raid. It's a stress test for whether open societies can remain open while still protecting themselves." The paradox deepens every step to tighten security risks, tightening the noose around civil liberties. Yet every lapse risks opening doors to threats that exploit Western freedoms. As this dilemma unfolds, the nation must ask, when security checkpoints look like battlefronts, do we gain safety or do we lose the very freedoms those checkpoints claim to defend? What comes next when a raid rattles the very foundation of national mobility? The Atlanta incident quickly forced policymakers, intelligence agencies, and civil rights advocates into urgent discussions. ICE leadership argued that the operation's success proved the need for expanded training and artificial intelligence-based detection systems capable of spotting forged biometric chips and counterfeit holograms in real time. According to internal DHS reports shared with Reuters, trials of AI-assisted passport scanning have already begun in Los Angeles and New York, showing a 40% higher detection rate compared with manual inspections. Lawmakers seized the moment to push for international cooperation. Senators on the Homeland Security Committee called for broader intelligence sharing agreements with Europe and Asia, insisting that counterfeit passports often originate abroad. If source countries such as China or Nigeria cannot be pressured to dismantle forgery factories, the US will remain in a defensive posture. President Trump's administration doubled down with White House statements demanding tougher bilateral treaties that allowed joint raids and extradition of key forgery masterminds. Yet policy shifts also fueled resistance. Civil liberties groups, already alarmed by the scale of ICE's actions, demanded independent oversight bodies to review raids. They argued that while AI may improve accuracy, it also risks deepening surveillance states. Human Rights Watch pointed out that up to 10% of detentions in such raids involve mistaken identity, a figure that translates into hundreds of innocent travelers swept into hours-long interrogations. Beyond the domestic stage, the strategic picture loomed larger. NATO officials expressed concern that forged identity rings are increasingly tied to hybrid warfare strategies. Defense News noted that Russian operatives moving through Belarus and the Balkans had used counterfeit documents to disguise military logistics personnel as aid workers. Similarly, Israeli intelligence warned that Iranian proxies linked to Hezbollah have exploited counterfeit European passports to move operatives across Mediterranean ports. In this light, Atlanta's seizure wasn't just about immigration, it was a preview of how identity warfare threatens Western stability. The economic dimensions cannot be ignored either. The aviation industry has already warned that widespread lockdowns could cause billions in annual losses if repeated at scale. BBC News reported that after Atlanta, certain multinational corporations quietly rerouted executives through Canadian and European hubs to avoid potential US disruptions. If that trend grows, American airports risk losing their place as global transit leaders. Experts remain divided on solutions. Former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer Dr. Karen Whitmore told The Guardian, "We must strike at the source, shut down the forgery plants, infiltrate the financial streams, and treat these networks as national security threats, not just immigration violations." By contrast, civil rights attorney Michael Alvarez warned unchecked this could normalize airport martial law. Once accepted, it becomes nearly impossible to roll back. The debate reveals a central policy crossroads. Will the US and its allies adopt a militarized approach to civilian travel hubs, embedding surveillance and tactical raids as standard practice? Or will Western democracies seek a balance, investing in intelligence and diplomacy while safeguarding freedoms? The unresolved question lingers: is America ready to transform airports into fortresses without eroding the openness that defines its democracy? What does Atlanta teach the West about the future of freedom and security? As the dust settled at Hartsfield-Jackson, the raid became more than a headline. It evolved into a case study for the global dilemmas of migration warfare and identity. By late August 2025, ICE reported that illegal entry attempts intercepted nationwide dropped 15% compared with the same quarter in 2024. On paper, this was a success story. One raid preventing potentially 1,000 illegal entries, contributing to broader declines in forgery-fueled infiltration. Yet behind the numbers lurked the uncomfortable reality that innocent travelers had also been swept up, with up to 10% of detentions involving mistaken identity, according to Human Rights Watch. The global scale cannot be ignored. The United Nations estimates 281 million migrants worldwide in 2025, a figure that underscores why forged documents remain so profitable. Each conflict zone, Ukraine, the Middle East, Africa, feeds the market for mobility. Analysts warn that as long as wars displace populations, syndicates will profit by selling false identities to both refugees and militants. DW News framed it bluntly: every displaced family is a market, and every militant is a customer. This nexus between conflict and mobility draws the US and NATO into the spotlight. Forged documents have become tools of hybrid warfare. Russian operatives use them to bypass sanctions. Iranian proxies employ them to fundraise abroad, and Chinese syndicates exploit them to expand influence operations across Southeast Asia. In this sense, the Atlanta raid highlights a strategic front in the global contest between Western democracies and authoritarian rivals. If the West cannot safeguard its identity systems, adversaries may gain silent but decisive leverage. Western experts have begun emphasizing this point. Professor James Cartwright of the London School of Economics told The Guardian, "We are not dealing with random smugglers. We are dealing with actors who understand that in a world of drones and cyber warfare, identity is the ultimate currency." Similarly, a NATO policy paper leaked in September stressed that airport vulnerabilities are soft targets that adversaries could exploit to undermine both military and civilian logistics in the event of escalation with Russia or China. The Trump administration has framed the Atlanta case as evidence that tough enforcement works, reinforcing its political message of uncompromising border security. Supporters argue that decisive action restores public confidence. Critics counter that repeated lockdowns risk undermining the very freedoms the West claims to defend. This tension between safety and liberty is likely to dominate policy debates in Washington, Brussels, and beyond well into 2026. For ordinary travelers, the symbolism remains powerful. The sight of biometric scanners rolled into lounges, tactical teams moving past abandoned luggage, and entire terminals frozen in silence is hard to forget. It crystallizes the paradox of modern mobility. Airports are meant to connect the world, yet in moments like Atlanta, they become fortresses under siege. So the question that lingers is one that resonates far beyond Atlanta. Can the United States and its allies secure their skies without closing the doors on the very values that define them? The answer will shape not only how people travel, but how the West itself navigates the balance between power and principle in an age of endless conflict. The August 2025 ICE raid at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport exposed the industrial scale of global passport forgery, seizing 1,700 counterfeit documents tied to networks in China, Mexico, and Africa. More than 200 flights were delayed and $1 million lost, but the operation also prevented an estimated 1,000 illegal entries. Nationwide raids surged past 500 that month, reflecting the Trump administration's hardline security posture. Analysts connected these forgery networks to wider conflicts from Russia's war in Ukraine to Iran's proxy operations, framing counterfeit documents as tools of hybrid warfare. Public debate erupted. National security advocates praised decisive enforcement, while civil rights groups decried profiling and wrongful detentions. Experts warned that repeated lockdowns could erode public trust and cost airlines billions. Policy discussions now center on AI detection, international cooperation, and independent oversight. Strategically, Atlanta revealed how identity fraud threatens not just immigration systems, but NATO's broader defense framework. Forged passports can move fighters' funds and technology across borders undetected, making airports soft targets in global rivalries. The raid thus stands as both a victory and a warning. The defining question remains: can the West protect its skies without betraying the freedoms it seeks to defend?